have no responsibility for the current pandemic.
Stop lying!
Science magazine, John Cohen, covered the bird flu vaccines, and there was some other articles about these, this new push for mRNA vaccines for bird flu.
Yeah.
And the statement was made that these current round of vaccines were using traditional mRNA technology, and I just gagged at that.
So we've already got, modern and traditional. Do you believe, because, I mean, do you believe that some vaccines are good?
I think that, so for instance, Science magazine, John Cohen, covered the bird flu vaccines, and there was some other articles about these, this new push for mRNA vaccines for bird flu.
Yeah.
And the statement was made that these current round of vaccines were using traditional mRNA technology, and I just gagged at that.
So we've already got, modern and traditional. Do you believe, because, I mean, do you believe that some vaccines are good?
I think that, so for instance, Science magazine, John Cohen, covered the bird flu vaccines, and there was some other articles about these, this new push for mRNA vaccines for bird flu.
Yeah.
And the statement was made that these current round of vaccines were using traditional mRNA technology, and I just gagged at that.
So we've already got, modern and traditional. Do you believe, because, I mean, do you believe that some vaccines are good?
Okay. Generally speaking, are you a pro-vaccine person?
Yes, I think as a hematologist oncologist who took care of immunocompromised patients as an attending for a decade, including many people post-autologous stem cell transplant, I am a extreme pro-vaccine person, because these patients who are immunocompromised are extremely vulnerable, and they benefit from vaccination in myriad ways. And we pursue vaccination in people post-transplant with the same vigor and commitment that pediatricians pursue vaccination. It's an important thing. But again, vaccines are like drugs. I think it's important for the American people to understand that the right drug to the right person at the right time is life-saving. But that doesn't mean that every single thing is perfect as is, that we can't improve, that there aren't safety concerns we take very seriously. And at FDA, we do that. Even in the short time I've been here, a number of things have been brought to my attention where we need to take action and strike the balance between preserving the benefits of these products but being careful and cognizant of the safety concerns.
Yeah, I remember learning about Dr. Jenner's development of the cowpox vaccine for smallpox. It's really an amazing story. I've had the privilege of doing a deep dive and researching it and writing about it. And in the 1700s, really, his idea was rejected because of a dogma that there's no way this could be actually happening. And they were ignoring clinical observations of nursemaids that had exposure to the cowpox, basically the virus itself. And they were noted to not be getting smallpox. And for a long time, Dr. Jenner had really encouraged vaccination. And there was the earliest group of anti-vaxxers probably in the history of the world right around that time, including some in the United States when the vaccine was brought to the United States around 1799, around 1800. A Harvard professor tried to champion this. It was positioned as a opportunity to have a national vaccine program. I think to President Adams, for whatever reason, I don't know, couldn't find the details, President Adams did not act on that recommendation. President Jefferson later did. And really that was the birth of vaccinations in the United States. It's really an amazing concept. And I love the idea of vaccinations. And I've seen vaccines save lives and do incredible things, as we've seen in an immunocompromised population in my own clinical practice. And really that was the birth of vaccinations in the United States. It's really an amazing concept. And I love the idea of vaccinations. And I've seen vaccines save lives and do incredible things, as we've seen in
He's seen it with his own eyes.
Population in my own clinical practice.
And there's another lesson there, which is that change in medicine isn't always easy. You know, there are lots of advances in medicine that aren't always easy. And I think there's going to be some people out there who are concerned about various aspects of our framework. But ultimately, I do think this is a step forward. And a lot of these questions will be answered by next calendar year when we start to get the interim results of some of these studies back. And we will have more information to tell the American people. And, you know, the results of these studies could surprise everybody. We don't know what that's the whole point of running a study. You don't know what you're going to get.
You never know what you're going to get, right? This is the end of that little town hall that they did yesterday. I didn't play this yesterday because I can only take so much of this stuff in a given 24-hour period before I really need 8 hours of sleep to recharge from this. It is remarkable that it seems as though, and this is the trick, I find myself falling into the same trap that Arthur Vandelay in the chat. I believe we're all in this trap where, because we are so subconsciously using social media to try and get a gauge on what people around us are thinking, and because social media is a gigantic, militarized, computerized, pre-programmed lie, there's no way to do that. And so we're left with this impression that we're one of the only people on earth who sees this charade. But in reality, I think a lot of people see it. They just don't understand it as perhaps as well as we might. I don't want to say with 100% confidence that we're, dead on balls accurate on every sort of, estimation on where we stand. But I think we are in a position to claim that our understanding of the biosecurity state and what they are capable of has grown in a pretty linear fashion for the last 5 years. And as we've learned, we've progressed, checked ourselves again and again. And we are at a stage now where we understand that weaponized piles of money are attempting to govern us on a supranational level. And one of the ways that they are attempting to do it is by putting actors in place on social media to convince us of consensuses around us, if I can say that. Every time you look on social media, it seems like everybody's busy with something. And so that, because of our biology, sends a root signal to our brain that, wow, the rest of the people around me are concerned about something, therefore I should be concerned about it. And that would be a pretty good baseline level of social interaction in a social animal. But social media is not social interaction. Social media is a militarized, computerized, pre-programmed false reality. And these guys are in front of us because they used that social media pre-programmed militarized version of reality to convince us that these guys might be in line for such a job, that it kind of makes sense given their track record, when in reality that track record only exists because of social media. And once you strip that from their existence and you leave it to really the ideas and the progression of their understanding of what the biosecurity state is capable of, you realize that these people are a part of the biosecurity state. It's impossible for it to be any other way. And you realize that the biosecurity state is present throughout social media, is scripting many podcasts or scripting the people on podcasts so that this narrative can be flawlessly maintained.
So my observation is there have been some great milestones from vaccines. At the same time, the anthrax vaccine was a total disaster. The swine flu vaccine.
How'd you like that, Mark? Just in time in the chat, and I timed it almost like I knew you were coming. That's pretty funny. Here we go. Let's see if I can play that again. Sorry about that. Oh, I got to start it. And the anthrax vaccine was a disaster.
Was a total disaster. The road vaccines. At the same time, the anthrax vaccine was a total disaster. The swine flu vaccine was a total disaster. The rotavirus vaccine was
I have no
removed from the
response.
market.
Jeez.
The original
This
one was
malfunctioning
removed from
thing.
the market.
There have been HIV vaccines that increase the acquisition of the virus.
HIV vaccines increase the acquisition of the virus. Wow, this is remarkable. I mean, that's great. I got to play that whole
your point's
thing
well
again.
taken that not every single thing that's labeled.
At the same time, the anthrax vaccine was a total disaster. The swine flu vaccine was a total disaster.
And so you know that I'm friends with a guy by the name of Mark Kulak who runs a kind of similar operation, albeit much more professional than mine, and for longer, and with a website full of well archived and well organized, let's say, information. He often refers to. And in this case, I have to give a big shout out to Mark for helping me to see the sort of central role that the anthrax vaccine in the military, and that's all behind the scenes. It's in the bureaucracy. It's in the meetings. It's in the meetings where you need lanyards or special clearance, where they're talking about the priorities for the military readiness and super soldiers and bioterrorism and what that means, and telling people in the bureaucracy that if we're going to be ready for this, then there are some things we might need to vaccinate our troops to. And one of them was anthrax. Another one was, curiously enough, botulinum toxin. And so there is also a history that I didn't know about until Mark's work of a military prerogative to develop a botulinum toxin vaccine. And so if they had candidates for that, it is very possible that soldiers were tested with those vaccines. It's very likely that Gulf War syndrome is a result of vaccine testing on those troops, not because they stored the Diet Coke in the sun for too long. And so there is a long history of this. Again, I'll use the word prerogative in the biosecurity state of America and perhaps NATO. Maybe it would be more useful to think of it as a NATO military security priority, national security priority, supranational security priority, to be aware of bioweapons, to search for and surveil potential bioweapons programs, and also to think about it as a thing that the military and maybe even the civilian population would potentially need to be ready for. Maybe the civilian population could potentially provide data that would allow our military to be more ready. And any of these permutations of this logic in the right back room would allow the prioritization of a national narrative, a simplified version of a biological narrative, which would get the population to maximally comply. And then behind the scenes, everybody would know what maximum compliance got them, which would be experimental data that would allow them to ultimately make the military more ready. So it's a very, we're not going to figure this out because suddenly we'll say the right combination of words and everybody in the world's going to agree with us. This is a crime scene. The criminal enterprise here is composed of probably, arguing and warring factions, or at least factions which are vying for a bigger piece of whatever pie we're talking about in terms of control and capital and real estate and intellectual property and potentially access to whatever data sets are being produced and the results of that analysis. And so here we have this, what can only be described as a clown show. These two guys are so out of their depth, and you can see it. Their whole, shtick, their whole thing that they're doing is obviously they're just acting, place holding. They're not doing anything with we watched the podcast the other day where they were going to have a farmer's market, and they were bragging about organizing a farmer's market. I mean, this, and they did a whole, oh shit, it's still doing it. Wow, I don't know why it's not giving me a control like that. They're still doing it, it's still just a mockery of what the FDA should be. And we'll talk about that more. I'm going to let this play a little longer, see how long they go.
Rotavirus vaccine was removed from the market.
original, yeah.
The original one was removed from the market.
There have been HIV vaccines that increase the acquisition of the virus. Your point's well taken that not every single.
Hey, thanks for listening. Six Girl is often in the chat. It's good to see you. She is right. It would have to be a vaccine against a toxoid. So botulinum is a bacteria, as I understand it, but some of the proteins are a protein or a complement of proteins that are made by the botulinum bacteria are among the most, let's say, low dose, high nasty compounds known to man. And so I was told by my history teacher in high school, actually, which is really weird, that if you could purify that botulinum protein that's toxic and have like a mayonnaise jar full of it and distribute it well, you could essentially wipe out most of the planet. And it would kill a lot of animals too. Like, it's a real nasty thing. And so you're right. What they're talking about is making a vaccine to the weaponized version. And that's, incidentally, as I've learned from the work of Mark Kulak, that's what any potential anthrax vaccine would also be made against. It would be made against a hypothetically weaponized anthrax weapon. So they're not thinking about anthrax in the dirt and trying to, immunize you against the naturally occurring anthrax. They're thinking about it from, at least as far as I can conceive, they are thinking of it that way. They could be thinking of it only that way for the simple fact that they know that they want to weaponize anthrax and have an antidote on board. And so they know that that's the only model to use. They're not trying to save you from the natural version. And so I suspect that would be, obviously, as she said, and it pointed out rightly, that would be the same with the botulinum toxin.
Thing that's labeled a vaccine has been an advance. But thankfully, at the FDA, we've tried to shield the American people from a lot of such things.
Yeah, good point. Shifting, you talked about endpoints with vaccine trials, how you'd like to see some clinical benefit as the endpoint, not just an antibody increase. Can you talk?
And so again, trying to be the right kind of coach here, the reason why red flags should be going off, the reason why you should hear the grinding of brake pads that are almost gone is because they are not moving from the idea that vaccines are a great idea, a wonderful methodology, one of the best inventions in modern medicine, one of the biggest advances, next to washing our hands or something like that. And it's really not good, because this should be a huge red flag, right? It should be a giant red flag for one reason and one reason only. No, many, many, many reasons. But for me, it's a red flag because in 2021, I was already warning that this is where they were going, that the only way to explain this sort of lack of movement from spike protein, the spike protein, the spike protein, was that they were eventually going to tell us a story about the spike protein instead of blaming the methodology, intramuscular injection and transfection in particular. That's why all those people were in place for the spike protein and amyloidosis, and now why we're still there right now. Yesterday, somebody spoke in front of our Congress and said the spike protein S1 subunit causes amyloidosis. And this is a confounding This is a confounding narrative that if it's built in there, it can only be built in there. Why? Because of what I said yesterday, that you have been made to accept the original sequence, because the original sequence is an exact one. And the only way that the S1 subunit can be significant, causing amyloidosis, is because it's an exact sequence with exact properties that presumably would go away if one of those exact amino acids were to change. And therefore, the tertiary structure of that exact sequence and its protein would change, and therefore lose the exact function of amyloid generating capabilities, because that is based on structure and function, right? You don't just, it's not every protein that causes it, otherwise we'd be dead a long time ago, right? Just one particle is for prions. And so all this mythology is tied in together. It's tied in together because nobody understands molecular biology correctly. Nobody in these circles, nobody in at the gas station, nobody at the water cooler understands molecular biology sufficiently enough to know that they've just omitted a whole layer of what you should think of as nature on a baseline. They've just removed that whole layer and replaced it with this mythology of viruses. Viruses that infect, viruses that are trying to kill us, viruses that constantly mutate, viruses that go endemic. And these guys, unfortunately, are so much more interested in progressing in the hierarchy, especially Vinay. Vinay sees himself, I imagine, as some kind of very precocious, super achiever, and he's still going in that general progression ever since he was vetted at the National Cancer Institutes in his training.
Talk a little bit about the different types of endpoints in vaccine trials for the COVID boosters, and what you'd like to see and what you'd like to see as a sort of condition of approval versus you'd like to see in some post-marketing committee.
Sorry, so to get back to what I was saying, in order to be the coach that I want to be, I want to remind you of how to look at this, what questions you should be what you should be paying attention to. And what you should be paying attention to is, what questions do they say are important? And right now, they are saying what's important is, what are the endpoints for vaccine trials, and should we choose different endpoints? And the problem with those questions is that they presume that intramuscular injection of a combination of substances is a valid form of medicine for healthy people. And that is absolutely biological nonsense. But they work under that assumption, and they ask questions that presume that. And that's the illusion. That's the enchantment. That's why everybody that listens to this is trapped. Because the language that they choose, the questions that they choose, are all, wittingly or unwittingly, they end up being chosen very well in order to reinforce their own presuppositions. You don't ask questions that bring in doubts about what you believe are right? I mean, and so it's hard to tell with these people whether they know what they're doing. My guess is that they know that they've been recruited to do what they're told, and they're doing what they're told, and they're given assignments. And he's been doing assignments like this for many, many years in academia. And so this is just another assignment. It's another, abstract to write. It's another grant application. That's all he's doing here. And of course, he's also been performing on YouTube for years. And so this is no different.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, I think when we call it symptomatic SARS-CoV-2.
Think about how that made him so much more comfortable on camera than he would otherwise would be when he's lying. If they just chose a professional who was a professional and wasn't so used to being on camera with Z-Dog and this guy, then transitioning to an FDA that does a podcast every few days would be rather difficult. Maybe even awkward. People used to tell me in 2020 that I needed media training, and they were going to pay for the media training. Piper Stover said she was going to pay for the media training. Brett Weinstein said maybe I should get media training.
But what it usually means, that's the primary endpoint of the original vaccine studies. And what that means is that if someone's out there and they're in the vaccine study and they start to feel sore throat, runny nose, they start to have symptoms of COVID, they're asked to swab themselves and submit the swab in. And so the primary endpoint is not, did you feel sick, but if you felt sick, did the swab test positive for the virus?
There you go. And so here we have two FDA officials sitting around agreeing that swabbing, PCRing, is a perfectly legit way for a high fidelity measurement not only of the virus's presence, but probably also relative quantities. This is at the heart of this operation, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how else to explain it, but there can be no other explanation for why all the people that I've tried to get in touch with, work with, teach a little bit of this stuff and get them to say it on their big platforms. This is the one thing that none of them will talk about, and the one thing that all of them were out in front on is that the PCR needs to be done different. Not done. Not done at all. They said it has to be done different. Most of them said that it's overcycling. Most of them said that it was maybe the primers. Most of them said that the Johnston report got no peer review. It's impossible. The FDA won't approve tests. The FDA has held us back on tests. And by the end of 2020, we were all pissed and begging for more tests. The government was distributing free tests. And at the head of that operation was the former research and development director of the Human Genome Project, Kevin McKernan, going on podcast after podcast after podcast. And following him would always be somebody like James Lyons-Weiler or Meryl Nass a couple weeks later. This is all scripted bullshit, ladies and gentlemen. It is scripted bullshit, part of a national security operation, not that dissimilar from what was the brochure version in the SPARS pandemic document. If you've never seen it, look it up and read it. We are in the midst of an operation like this. It is very possible that the FDA is already effectively a non-issue for their operation, and I'll explain that in a minute. Because once they have these people and they have them chasing shiny objects and getting gold stars on their presentation, then the FDA is toothless.
That we care about, COVID-19. And that endpoint is roughly called symptomatic SARS-CoV-2. And that's what we're asking manufacturers to power their study to have a lower bound that excludes a 30% or more reduction.
Can you believe that he is explaining how companies should formulate their results of their COVID-19 vaccine control trials? That's what the fake health freedom movement got you. That's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the head of the HHS got us. That's what Jay Bhattacharya at NIH has gotten us, and that's what having an Egyptian and an Indian, or whatever these guys are, because they're not Americans. This guy will regularly say it. Watch him. He will regularly say the American people. The American people. It's good for the American people. It's good for the American people. Do you know why he talks like that? Because he's not an American person. And he doesn't think of us as America. And because he's on a bullshit script.
In that endpoint, which I think is quite reasonable and fair. And one of the initial concerns of the vaccine is that a vaccine where it's barely better than placebo might do more harm than good by creating a false reassurance. And I think that's a quote from Phil Krause, who used to work here. So we're asking them to improve symptomatic SARS-CoV-2. But of course, we're also looking at severe disease, hospitalization, and death. We're not asking them to power the study for those endpoints, because that will make the study very, very large. But we are looking at those endpoints. And I think when we get the results of this study, doctors could look at it and interpret it in, as they see fit. They can counsel the patient, well, this is what you get, this is how long it lasts for, here's what we don't know, and here's what we do know. And I don't attempt to prejudge. I don't know I'm not a fortune teller. That's why we run trials. And so we'll see what we get, and then it'll allow the American people and their physicians to make.
Honestly, I don't think anybody who at this stage argues without using better language than that this guy's using can be nothing more than a It's like an 8th grade overachiever and the intellect of an 8th grade overachiever. Here's the book, learn it. Here's the script, memorize it. And because he knows the words and he's familiar with it and he hears other people saying it and everybody around him tells him it's good, that's it. That's all that's required, because there's no actual sausage being made between his ears. He doesn't spend his day, that's not how it works. He's looking for his next gold star. He's looking for his next pat on his back, or his little, ribbon on his lapel, or that's all he's thinking about. And a lot of people think like that. A lot of people just want to be a successful broadcaster, or, I just want to be a journalist, or I don't know, whatever. That's not who I am. I'm a biologist, and I'm an American, and my kids are American. My wife is Dutch. I see the EU being destroyed. I see America being destroyed, but I also see them taking advantage of a anticipated change in the dynamics of our population, the demographics of our population, as predicted by the population pyramids of the West. And so I don't know exactly how they're dismantling the American democracy as they take advantage of this phenomenon. But I think if you're honest as an American, you can look around and see it all around you. You can see it in the changing demographics or even need for elementary schools. You can see it you will see it very soon in the attendance of and the way that colleges market their wares, because the competition for students is going to increase extremely fast in America, and indeed around the world. Maybe in America we won't feel it so much because we still get a good influx of foreigners, but they might have to recruit harder. And the more useless our universities are, then potentially the less likely it is that they're going to come over here. And so this could very well be the scripted, controlled demolition of the American culture, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. But what could happen here, in an optimistic sense, is that Americans could realize that we are being given these cards, and it's up to us to play them. And the cards are that, for whatever reason, a lot of us are multiracial. And so the identity that we have really is America. It's not African American or Irish American or Puerto Rican American. Well, Puerto Rican Americans are not really, it's still America. I'm sorry. Like Mexican American. This idea that you had to have one foot in one place and one foot in another was already established when I was in college, in this time of multiculturalism and all this other stuff. And multiculturalism is even a lie. America is not multicultural. America is America. And if we realize that and understand that and embrace it as in the way that, let's say, Tyrion Lannister would have said in Game of Thrones, when he was talking to Jon Snow and telling him about how you're a bastard. You are a bastard. You should wear it as armor. Don't be ashamed of it. And as Americans, with a sordid history with our own native people, a sordid history with African slavery, we are just one example in world history of a people that went from struggling to survive to trying to rule the world, or trying to whatever. I don't know. This idea that we need to now be ashamed of our past, where do we draw the line there? How do we draw the line there? And the beautiful thing of it is that as multiracial Americans, if we look for our multiracial identity, I know it's really easy for me because my multiracial identity comes out in my phenotype, and it's obvious that I don't fit in any of these boxes. You can't be a 6'6" Filipino. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Yet for my whole life, that's basically what everybody's called me. You're a 6'6" Filipino, but I'm not. I'm a mutt. My mom was already half Indian and Filipino, so she already looked a little different than most of the people around her. But she had the last name that worked. And so this mutt identity is a way for us to wake up to their illusion on a different level, because if we all understand that it's not black and white or brown in America, this is one of the few places where we don't have that problem, generally speaking. That we don't have to claim we're purebred, because most of us aren't. And even if outwardly it looks like we are white or we are black, in reality, that's probably not true. And if we embrace that, and we embrace our collective history, how we got here one way or another, but we now have the ability to pull our heads out. We have the ability to embrace our collective history. We're all here right now. Our children are all here right now. And most of us agree that we want our children to grow up here. And so if we all come together under that idea, rather than the idea that we all cheer for the White Sox or, white pride, or there's a white race. They want us to fight for races because the races are already gone. They want us to fight for white because white is already gone. And what white do you mean? Am I white? My dad's family is white as far as we can trace it back. Does that make me white? Or is it because I got one drop of the other that makes me brown? And that argument is their argument. That argument is the same slave speak that these guys are arguing with regard to vaccine. And which endpoint should we use? Well, ethnicity. What ethnicity are you? What box are you going to check? This is all part of the current trap that we are in as Americans. One of the best ways to throw off that trap would be to just say what Morgan Freeman said a long time ago. You agree not to talk about race, I'll agree not to talk about race, and then it'll be not a problem anymore. And we just all become Americans. It's a crazy idea, but the way that would work is if we all embrace that we are on the same dirt, on the same land, with the same borders, with a lot of the same, there's a lot of stuff that we could preserve together, take advantage of, and reorganize despite these people, in spite of those people. I don't know which one it is. Anyway.
Make these choices in more
What
informed
am I
way.
talking about?
So taking that one step further to the world of cancer research and cancer therapeutic regulation, there are a lot of different thoughts as to what the endpoints should be for approval of cancer therapeutics. Some say it's surrogate endpoints. Some have long been champions of clinical endpoints, that is overall survival or disease-free survival. Where do you stand in sort of that spectrum of interest in the different endpoints, and what do you see as a requirement for approval in general?
I really think for that, we need both. We will at FDA for life-threatening conditions that affect small populations that are very dire, where there are few treatment options, we will expedite approval through surrogate endpoints that show tumor is being reduced or we're delaying the time until relapse.
Now, what I think would be cool is if there was a whole movement in America to not give a shit about this, not to care about MAHA at all, but instead a whole movement in America to try to restore strict officiating in the NBA. And to somehow fix the problem that the three-point line has caused, and to better regulate the contracts of athletes and to protect them, and to reorganize NCAA sports. You see what I mean? That would be America taking priority and American culture taking priority. Now, maybe you're not into basketball. Maybe you can think of another sport or another activity that we do together as people, that we celebrate life together, that we could focus on and argue about instead of, endpoints for vaccines or whether or not talc powder is any good and how we should regulate it. And I think that that's the trick, to try and find the questions that we want to prioritize, the ideas that we want to prioritize, and the initiatives that we want to prioritize. Because right now, as long as we use social media, we will always end up accidentally prioritizing something that social media wants us to prioritize, because we are being forced to choose from a list. We have to write the list.
We'll expedite those approvals through accelerated approval and a number of other pathways available to us. But that doesn't mean we're not also interested in overall survival. We can ascertain that with the long-term follow-up of trials, or with post-marketing studies, or with real-world data. And there's a number of innovations in this space, including work on target trials and other sorts of advances in the causal inference space from real-world data. So the answer to the question is really both. We have to, and we will always embrace surrogate endpoints for people who have very concerning diseases, very rare conditions, few treatment options. We have an obligation at FDA to expedite those products to those.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. This is one of the only places where we talk about people being on a script, and that script is very easy. It's very simple. You have to accept that there was a novel virus, that it killed millions of people, that millions more were saved, and it could come again because it was gain of function. This is the former Research and Development Director of the Human Genome Project, Kevin McKernan, stating it very, very clearly.
Is that this RNA exists, you can capture it, you can sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.
And so these people were put on a script because this is a national security priority. Social media is part of that control mechanism. So if you're going to go on social media, you have to go on social media with the idea of undermining it. You can't go on it with the idea of gathering information or changing minds, because that doesn't happen there. And the reason why I know that is many, but one of the best reasons that I know that is Kevin McKernan. This is a guy who sought me out in March of 2020. And I was more or less in and out of his spell for 5 years, and I've certainly been followed by him for 5 years. It's been 28 days since he did a stream on Rumble, and I think part of the reason might be because I keep emphasizing that there's no way that this slide could exist unless this guy was put in place, because this guy has the same narrative that Kevin McKernan has with regard to the lab leak Scooby-Doo mystery. And I've explained it very succinctly for a few years now, and these guys make fun of me all the time for saying it this way, but they've fooled us into solving a mystery. They fooled us into solving a mystery about a novel virus, and all of these anti-vax health freedom organizations were put in place to make sure that we would never question the existence of the novel virus, how it is found, how it is sequenced, how it is whatever. And even Brian Hooker needed to be controlled in order for this to work. Because in 2013, he was saying not autism. And in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, he was saying asymptomatic spread and autism.
He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged, a condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged.
And so why did they do this? I think, unfortunately, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got caught up in something much bigger than him. And he just went along with it because, he's got a lot of people whispering in his ears. But that's how we got to the stage where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is where he is. And I think this plan was hatched by Tony Lyons and probably Steve Bannon already back in 2008 when Jesse Ventura wrote a book with Skyhorse Publishing. And in the epilogue, they tell a story about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. becoming vice president after being an independent candidate and joining up with a one of the two candidates. See? And Steve Bannon was advocating for him to be vice president, like for a while. And that's what the narrative is that includes that presidential candidate getting shot, which in the book is supposedly Jesse Ventura. But, substitute Trump in there and you have basically the story. I think that it's very likely that the biological narrative that we've been stuck in, the hamster wheel that we've been running in, that started with spike protein and, gain of function and furin cleavage sites and HIV inserts and staphylococcus and enterotoxin B homologies, all of that stuff was probably created by Kevin McKernan and Robert Malone, among others. But these are the two guys that are now on stage and have been on stage on social media since the beginning, especially this fella. And they all agree that, PCR works. It's just a matter of how you do it. And we can find the virus, we can sequence it, we can put it in cells and recapitulate disease, which is the same thing as saying there is a novel virus. It killed millions of people. Millions more were saved by the vaccines. And it could come again because, gain of function is real. That's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book actually says, the one that they tried to trap me in writing and becoming the expert of, and essentially fired me when I no longer went along with it. And that's where we are. I don't think that he's aware of how we are screwed if we don't wake up our children to this mess. The adults that are in Congress and in the bureaucracy of our government are probably already lost because they have been taught this mystery and taught this narrative over their entire career. And so they're not coming at it from an angle where it's going to be easy for them to see through it. Even somebody like Ron Johnson is coming at it from an angle where he's had security briefings and lanyard meetings and secret meetings and private meetings and skiff meetings where they talk about this stuff even before 9/11. Because, of course, if you're paying attention to Mark Kulak, you know that before 9/11 it was all bio. So these people have been rehearsing this script. Even if they're unwittingly rehearsing a script, they think that they're getting ready for something. They are ready for it. It's here now. The laughable thing is to see that Steve Bannon knew it could be a lab leak in January of 2020, that Steve Bannon had Steve Hatfield on his show, The War Room, in 2020, that Steve Bannon is the guy who works for Goldman Sachs, like Aaron Siri worked for Goldman Sachs. Like, ladies and gentlemen, it's bad news, because you can also see a red thread through the father of Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein, the financial advisor, numerical advisor to Peter Thiel of Thiel Capital, because his father, Les Weinstein, was in the Department of Justice of his father, Robert F. Kennedy. And as an intellectual property lawyer, no less, over the thalidomide scandal, no less, and the formation of the FDA, no less, which was, from the beginning of the pandemic, in the way, as Kevin McKernan said on podcast after podcast in 2020. Intellectual property expert has said the FDA is in the way, it's corrupt, it's whatever. These guys have said the FDA is corrupt, whatever. And now we're hearing those two foreign guys a minute ago saying that vaccines are great, we just have to do different endpoints. They're big fans of vaccines. This is for all the marbles. It is for the children, the grandchildren of Earth, not the children of Earth. They're already alive. It's the grandchildren of Earth, because they need the data from birth to death. So they're ramping up to that. They know that this window's open for a generation or two. They got you. They got the population pyramid mapped out. They know what they're missing. They know what they already collected. They know what they can store and what they can't. They might even need to do a couple iterations of the exercise of collecting and storing it. And so maybe this was the first, or already on their second or third trial of it. I don't know, because I'm not behind the scenes of this malevolent operation, and neither is she. But understand that if you go on a podcast and two of the other people that are being interviewed, like say Callie and Dr. Cruz, are lying together on the same script, then Mary Talley Bowden has no chance of either learning it, nor does she have a chance of making any useful progress in understanding if they are working together to make sure that she doesn't covertly. And I assure you that this happens and has happened and has been weaponized against us. And instead, what they would like you to be concerned about is AI. Oh my goodness, AI is going to get us. No, coordinated liars on social media podcasts are thousands of times more dangerous than an AI algorithm run wild. I assure you, seek the truth, ladies and gentlemen. Seek the truth. Otherwise, you will be subject to this kind of thing. Like I was subject to this kind of thing. Tommy stands no chance of learning anything if these two are singing a song together. And certainly Tommy's viewers have no chance. That's how podcasts work. That's why I'm dangerous, right? Because if you don't follow what I'm saying, then you're gone. That if you don't believe it, don't understand it, there's nobody to catch me. There's nobody to say, yeah, but Jay, and keep you there so that you could agree with one or the other, or you could follow both. There's nothing like that. It's either I hold you or I don't. It's a pretty dangerous tightrope to walk in the grand scheme of grifts. Too bad I'm not grifting, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get some. This is really important. Why is this scripted bullshit? Why? Not only to hide the murder and lies, but to fundamentally change the way that we think about ourselves as people into humans, from people into experimental animals, from people into communities, from people into races. It's scripted bullshit because social media is going to become the supranational control over all people. And it's how they will take control of the evolution of the species. Because if they can use social media to convince our kids not to have kids or convince our kids not to have pets, social media is an amazing, amazing, powerful thing, right? And they can. They can use social media to make sure that our kids never, ever, ever realize that intramuscular injection is a terrible methodology. They never, ever realize that virology is not a high-fidelity science. It's almost exclusively based on transfection. And that public health is not a very well justified idea. And they're never going to meet a social studies teacher who's going to tell them that. They're never going to meet a biology teacher who's going to tell them that gain of function is a myth, or that autism is a myth, or that pandemics are a myth, because they're never going to meet a biology teacher until they meet me that's capable of teaching it. That's aware of the way that a molecular phylogeny myth has been used to, I mean, really just disconnect ourselves from the nature of life. It is a crazy, crazy thing that I've slowly become aware of.
Who has perished as a result of COVID-19.
This is where we are.
But when the vaccine became
yesterday.
widely available in 2021, deaths sharply declined, and many lives have been saved in the years since. Many in this room, speaking for myself as well as others, probably have been saved from this disease because of those vaccines. One study found that 3 million American deaths were averted. 18 million hospitalizations were avoided, and $1 trillion in healthcare costs were saved in the United States in just the first 2 years after COVID vaccines were distributed. I'd like this study entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection.
No objection.
Now, vaccines not only saved American lives, they enabled us to get back on our feet economically. They enabled the American economy to recover. Let's try to think of where we were 5 years ago with a deadly, unknown virus spreading through America and through the world. We were only able to come so far because of the vaccines and the researchers who developed them and the public health officials who distribute them. And now those individuals are again under attack, our public health officials. I've looked at those documents, maybe not all of them, that the majority alleges show that the Biden administration or those public health officials suppressed evidence of side effects. Let's be clear, the allegation is that they purposefully concealed evidence. I am unable to support that conclusion with this evidence. In fact, the primary piece of evidence for this claim is that the CDC did not issue a notice on its Health Alert Network, HAN, in May 2021, while it was still analyzing the evidence about myocarditis. We're talking about myocarditis. The chairman has referenced other side effects. I'm not sure what he means. But what I see as I look at that evidence is public health officials wrestling with what to do and what kind of warning to issue. And again, side effects must be studied and communicated. And that's what I see happening in these documents that the majority has released. So we have to distinguish, I think, between differences of opinion under the pressure of a pandemic and separate the opinions of scientists who are working for the greater good and, frankly, others who may simply be seeking to sow distrust while they profit off misinformation and fear. And I'm, frankly, deeply concerned about some of today's witnesses because they have a financial interest in fomenting distrust about COVID-19 vaccines and pushing untested alternative remedies over proven treatments. In fact, two of today's witnesses are executives at something called the Wellness Company, which sells the disproven treatment, ivermectin, and a host of untested supplements, which include something called, quote, unquote, Ultimate Spike Detox, costs $89.99 a bottle.
You understand that this is a scripted setup, right? That the Maha movement can be easily made fun of by this side by design. It's not accident that we're coming here, even if this is just a monkey, which I'm sure this is just a script reading monkey, but that he wouldn't be there still for as long as he was if he wasn't. But understand that it's a show for us. It's a show for us. And in a few minutes, this guy right here from my home state of Wisconsin is going to say it's a show for us. We're going to just give American people this show and we're going to let them decide. This is scripted bullshit because it is a trap for our grandchildren. And we are going to willingly give our grandchildren up to this trap if we don't look and see it for what it is.
Another makes money from suing vaccine companies, and still others are pushing unsupported research while rejecting the proven scientists on COVID and other vaccines. Let's be very clear that fear-mongering and rushing to conclusions without examining the evidence can lead to tremendous harm. And this risk is not just hypothetical or rhetorical. Misinformation about the safety of vaccines has led to a deadly outbreak of a preventable disease. We all know it, measles. Just 25 years ago, measles was declared illegal.
You can't really hear it if you don't have headphones on, but in the background you can hear that there are people at the panel or behind the panel that are like groaning when he says this stuff. It's hilarious.
Eliminated in the United States. Since then, conspiracy theories, some financially motivated, have caused vaccination.
They should look demoralized though, right? Because they know their job is to pacify with theater. These are the social media gladiators, basically. You know, it's like American gladiators. Wow, that's what we should call it. It is. It's like American gladiators. This is bullshit. maybe American Gladiators was relatively real. I mean, they used these padded things. They were hitting each other pretty hard. I mean, I know nitro was real.
Rates to plummet. Last September, the CDC warned that declining childhood vaccination could lead to a resurgence of a preventable disease like measles and rotavirus. Exactly what is happening today. As of today, more than 1,000 Americans have been diagnosed with measles this year in 31 states, many of them children. So far, 3 have died. These deaths were preventable. They could have been avoided, but for the efforts of misinformation proponents that have spread lies and created fears. There has been so much misinformation and fear since COVID-19.
Remember, the presumption here is that the Department of Defense or intelligence agencies or weaponized piles of money like supranational organizations would never spread misinformation on social media. That social media would never be used to spread misinformation in a militarized way, to perhaps gain maximum compliance. The implication here from a likely read-in person is that the government never does that. The government would never do it. Governments would never do it. And governments would never collude with other governments, like in a NATO type organization kind of way to control public opinion using social media against us. They would never do that. Only the wellness company who's selling $80 bottles of spike enthusiast stuff would do that. Now, I'm not saying that the wellness company is good, but this joker is trying to make us believe that the only thing going wrong with the pandemic is that there's all these bad actors like, the wellness company. Give me a break. That's what the amazing Polly told us on X, for shit's sake.
19 emerged that during the height of the pandemic, healthcare workers and public health officials were often harassed and threatened. Some of them continue to fear for their lives.
If you haven't seen it, Mark Kulak did a really awesome episode this morning, which basically I think frames the appearance of Robert Malone and the pattern of behavior of Robert Malone the best. And that is that when Mike Callahan called him and said, you need to spin your team up, it wasn't to spin a team up about repurposed drugs or spin a team up about I don't know, antibody dependent enhancement, or spin a team up about, he needed to spin a narrative control team up. And that's what you see with him on stage with Lee Min-Yan and with Ryan Cole in churches in 2021. That's what you see with him, doing the 6 international COVID summits and visiting the Vatican and all this other shit. That's narrative control. That's not some guy who's a really international whistleblower. I got to go everywhere and teach this stuff, man.
During the first frightening year of the pandemic, the Trump administration withheld critical information from the public, made baseless promises that the virus would magically disappear. I think I'm almost quoting the president. Magically disappear, engaged in unfounded conspiracy theories and sham science about COVID-19 treatments, and sowed the seeds.
This is the reason why I don't think it's likely that Donald Trump went off script with the warp speed. I think it's more likely that he was offered a number of alternatives, and they could easily sell one alternative as better than the other, and maybe he chose a different one, but these were not lose-win situations. It wasn't a brilliant idea on his part to speed stuff up. I don't think so. If that would be the case, I think then that there would be more of a narrative in the Trump sect about the resistance to it. There would have been a more public resistance to it. Like Fauci didn't want to rush anything. The FDA, Peter Marks was really against rushing it, but Donald Trump said, screw it, I'm going to do it anyway. And I don't think that happened. I think that they gave him 2 alternatives. He chose one, and they told him he was a genius for choosing that one. And they're still playing him now like that. And that's I think the most, because I don't think many presidents are ever choosing anything. They're given choices because it's it's too big of a ship or something like that.
Of distrust in public health institutions. And then, to the tremendous credit of President Trump, he fast-tracked the vaccine.
See, and he's willing to give him credit. Oh, to the credit of President Trump. And again, I think that was like a setup. They made him feel smart about it, so much so that he went on the campaign trail last year telling everybody that it was smart. I don't think that's accident. I think that's duping.
Let me repeat. To the credit of the Trump administration, the President of the United States fast-tracked the vaccine and saved lives.
I didn't even have to make him repeat it. He repeated it. And it saved lives, and he's going to take credit for that until he dies. Of course he will. It's millions. It saved millions.
We need to learn from history. We're seeing the same pattern now.
We need to learn from history is really amazing, an amazing enchantment. I hear an amazing enchantment there, because what that does is it sets up a presupposition that you understand the history. I know you understand the history, and we have to learn from the history. Well, he just told you the history, right? So it's an enchantment. It's an amazing enchantment.
Those same seeds of doubt and distrust have been nurtured by the president's choices for key positions in this administration, including the decision to install a well-known vaccine skeptic as the head of HHS and to fill our public health agencies with conspiracists. And let's bring it right to the present day. Just yesterday, it was announced that the FDA may start restricting access to new COVID boosters to those over 65 or with a narrow set of pre-existing conditions. Now, we ought to be very frank here. Discerning what exactly this new guidance may be at the moment is confusing. And the troubling news leaves many questions unanswered about whether and how people can actually access vaccines if they want to do so. Will Americans who...
It's almost like on one side, it's about free speech and choice, and on the other side, it's about free access and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like the same as like other things. It's really weird until you see it as scripted bullshit like it is. I'm going to be back in a second. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. If you want to share the stream, you can share it at stream.gigaohm.bio after it's transcoded. And if you have the means, can I humbly request that you go to gigaohmbiological.com and find a way to chip in something to help this stream keep going. I want to dedicate as much time as I can to the production of a high school curriculum that will teach this biology. I'm going to be back in a second with a little bit of a summary. Thank you very much for being here. Don't forget, this is a multi-generational plan. This is a multinational security priority. And social media is one of the ways that they keep our eyes off of the ball. So unfortunately, as fun as it is, we're going to have to wean ourselves from it, especially Substack and X. Unfortunately, I think those are tools of theirs, and they are using the content that we put on those platforms in their AI generation, and we are allowing them to fine-tune their military tools to control our consciousness, and we don't want to do that. So we want to get off social media, start sending emails again, start making phone calls. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in a minute.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Boom!
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for staying. We're going to start the second half of the show today. Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. The voice that you hear is that of Jonathan JJCouey. I come to you live out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the back of my garage. A lot of my ideas are available in diluted and obfuscated form on the Substack called Woodhouse 76. That is run by a trader in America named Jessica Hockett in cooperation with Jonathan Engler and Nick Hudson of Panda. And they have fake arguments with Claire Craig of Heart and Pierre Corey of FLCCC, now IMA. And also with Mike Eden and with Jay Bhattacharya, of course, because, again, this is all one big show, and you're not going to see me in it, even though I helped the current Health and Human Services Secretary write his book, The Wuhan Cover-Up, that Malone can't seem to get the title right. And then I used to work for Children's Health Defense, been at a few barbecues with Jay Bhattacharya. He always defers to me as the biologist until he got this job at NIH, and now he's pretty good at biology, I guess. So a lot of people are whining about the idea that I never write anything down. And so I thought I'd write something down today and walk you through it. And see if this gets anybody past the goal here. I might even put this slide on Substack later today because, maybe Substack is a way of getting people off Substack is by occasionally posting to it. I don't know. I don't know what my strategy is going to be. I just know that I'm going to read this to you right now. I'm going to go over here and just transform to the reading mode. And I'm going to put myself down here at the bottom. And I just want to explain a few things that have to do with like my current summary of the situation, if you will, and reiterate what I think are some of the big points that everybody whines about and has been whining about ever since I've been hammering on Robert Malone. I'm getting a lot of flack in the background that I don't have any clear points, or I don't know what it is. So I thought I'd clear some things up for you. Again, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing. And if you can, really, thanks for sharing. First point is that in American law, there's a principle that goes something like, and so remember the sort of the caveat here is that I'm not a law student. And so, and if you're not from America, then a lot of these terms won't mean anything likely in your set of legal precedents and legal principles. But in America, there are a few legal principles, and you can discuss them in certain ways. And I might not be exactly accurate, great. I'm not a certified fundamentalist, a certified constitutional scholar or something like that. I'm not even an L1 law student. But I do know that when I say these combinations of words like this to lawyers, they either have one of two reactions. Either they say, holy shit, where did you learn that? Or they kind of react with a blank look and say that they don't really think it's an appropriate time for these things, or there's no one withstanding, or some other thing, and then they walk away. So I'll just read this out loud. Any law that allows suspension of fundamental rights based on the rational basis test alone without holding the government to strict scrutiny is unconstitutional. So I have to explain a few things in there for the non-American audience and for the American audience alike. Fundamental rights are the rights that are codified in the Constitution. And based on the rational basis test means that you just have to have a hunch or a reason. The rational basis test means you're not crazy. And so when something can be made by the rational basis test alone, for example, like zoning laws, if the mayor of your city and the township decide to change the zoning laws in your region, that they can do that, and that's suspending fundamental rights. You can't build a house there anymore. You can only have a business there, or vice versa, or any other number of zoning laws, or maybe even putting a pipe there or something like that. And those are technically suspensions of fundamental rights that occur on the rational basis test alone. Those guys in that room, or that guy in the room, or that lady in the room just has to have a good reason, and a reasonable reason. And they don't even have to explain what it is. And that's how the PrEP Act is written. that a indefinite national emergency that suspends all kinds of fundamental rights, never mind the legislated protections that are built in a number of these administrative things, but all of those things are suspended on the rational basis test alone. And at this time, it's the rational basis defined by the whimsical mind of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who at one time thought it would be a clever idea to put a bicycle and a dead bear in a park as a joke. So we are due substantive due process for any such encroachment, meaning that they got to do some kind of ritual before they do this. They can't just do it. They have to have a list of reasons or a threshold or describe some set of circumstances that would allow them to do this before they do it, not after or a sidebar from. It should be in the law, and it's not. And because it's not, the PrEP Act is unconstitutional on its face, because it allows the suspension of fundamental rights without holding the government to strict scrutiny. Now, if you just learn the definitions of those words and understand that combination of them, you can stun a lawyer. Because the pandemic is a PrEP Act emergency declaration that is still suspending a number of fundamental rights right now on the rational basis test alone, essentially Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s rational basis. That's point number one. Point number two is, yes, virology is a fraud, but like PCR, it's not fake. There is only fraudulent use. No one denies bacteriophages, including the no virus crew, and that is because there is an irreducibly complex background noise of genetic signals all around us, and a large portion of that noise is bacteriophages. This noise is the biological source foundation of their myth. And it is co-opting. Its co-opting started. Should that be its? No, it is co-opting. That should be its. Its co-opting started with metabiota, Nathan Wolfe, and metagenomic sequencing. I am actually telling you that the book Viral Storm in 2011 is an admission. The existence of metabiota and what they sold on stage in TED Talks is exactly the fraud of virology and exactly the explanation that I'm giving you here. An irreducibly complex background of phages and bacterial origin signals were confounded as direct human pathogens, exclusively generalized across as exclusively human pathogens. And somebody like Nathan Wolfe was responsible for establishing that science. Somebody like Peter Daszak was responsible for establishing that science. Somebody like Ralph Baric was establishing that science. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's all one illusion. And so they needed a neutered, useless, no virus crew to be part of the illusion. Otherwise, you might get here where you realize that first and foremost, most of virology is based on experiments that start with a synthetic pure quantity of the DNA or RNA that they purport is viral, and therefore are just transfection experiments. This does not mean that there are no signals to be found, nor does it mean that contagious phenomena do not exist, but the explanation for them is not human pathogens. The explanation for them is not Mother Nature out to get us. The explanation for them is not EcoHealth Alliance, nor is it gain of function and the diffuse proposal. It is a national security myth. Should be moving here. It's not moving. Oh, resume slideshow. Sorry. RNA is a class of molecule without the requisite biological and chemical characteristics that would permit any kind of sustained spontaneous spread. This concept is antithetical to everything we have been taught about the unique biological chemistry of DNA. Only virology primary literature makes claims otherwise about RNA, and those papers are all written by players. And two very good clues are all the papers about remdesivir and all the papers about XON. the supposed proofreading protein in coronaviruses, because these papers are all written by people associated with Ralph Barrick and Mark Denizen, the two guys that supposedly found remdesivir. And what does remdesivir do? It interferes with the proofreading of coronavirus RNA, which is the foundational myth of an RNA pandemic, because otherwise they all admit that RNA could never do this. I mean, it's just the coronaviruses have this real special function that allows them to have this gigantic genome and not make any errors. And after 5 years, Vinay Prasad thinks that that signal has become and stayed a uniform signal that's like still the J6 lineage. So if I'm, that's where you go if you want to train yourself on this stuff. PCR is not a valid diagnostic as it was used in 2020. The use of PCR as a tool on the academic bench requires vigorous experimental discipline that includes replicate experiments as well as exquisitely chosen and designed negative and positive controls. The EU granted diagnostic products used in 2020 and 21 and 22 actually had none of these widely accepted attributes that make PCR a gold standard methodology in academia. It could be that many or all of the current products on the market also lack these crucial methodological checkpoints that would be the basis for any claims of high fidelity detection capability. This is potentially massive system-wide fraud that the current FDA is never going to check. By design. Jessica Rose isn't saying that. Kevin McKernan's not going to tell you that. But it's definitely true. The FDA should have evaluated every diagnostic product as a separate medical device. Perhaps more importantly, under the still in effect PrEP Act emergency, the FDA will never be asked to revisit it. And PCR diagnostics instead will focus on future regulatory activities only, which you heard in the town hall yesterday. Instead, PCR testing as a standard has likely created the ideal medical remnant source for several Human Genome Project-related national security priorities. How do you like them apples? And so the national security priority for the USA, one of them at least, is to achieve a national database of genetic and medical data on every citizen and soldier from birth. At the same time, the old vaccine schedule will be acknowledged as flawed because it was a one-size-fits-all system. The old FDA will be identified as no longer appropriate for regulating personal medicine. But in reality, it doesn't really matter because it's already neutralized. And so the rest will be theater because they need our data from birth until death. So this isn't about us. It's about the grandchildren. This is about the grandchildren of Earth accepting intramuscular injection as medicine, virology as a science, and public health as both a reason and an answer. And this is the reason why Robert Malone and Kevin McKernan were so prominent in the narrative control space for 5 years. It's the only explanation for it. How's that? So we did look at some scripted bullshit yesterday, and we looked at some in the beginning, and I want to finish this with a little bit of looking at the scripted bullshit that we left off with just now with that Senate hearing. But let's watch when we hand the mic to Senator Ron Johnson and Peter McCullough and some other guy who's sure it's amyloid. That should have been playing first. Oh, well, it's going to play now.
His experiences addressing both measles and COVID-19. He's not only a dedicated public service, but he's also a physician who led his state, Hawaii, during the pandemic. And I'm thankful to him for being here today. And I look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. I think people understand why you didn't join me in my oversight request. There's over 70 letters that were not responded to. Again, I haven't uncovered yet what they were trying to hide, but our intention is to do so. You did mention the irrefutable fact that these injections save lives. I would enter into the record a recent study by Raphael Lataster, who does a pretty effective job of rebutting one of those studies from Watson et al. But put in the record, and again, will allow the public, the American people who are watching this hearing, decide based on what testimony is, based on what's been entered in the record.
We will let the American public decide. We will give them all the evidence and let them decide. This is the trap. If you're using social media to decide, you're not going to make a decision on your own. As Sam Harris said, free will is an illusion. On social media, it sure as hell is. Free will with your wife, what you say to your wife, that's more in your control than the conscious questions that come to mind when you're freely using social media, never mind skillfully using it. Make sure you understand that message clearly. We are in trouble.
Record based on our report. It is the custom of this, the full committee and the subcommittee to swear in witnesses. So if you all rise and raise your right hand.
Look at that. There's Aaron Siri.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give before the subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated.
That was funny.
Our first witness is Dr. Peter McCulloch. Dr. McCulloch is an internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist from Dallas, Texas. He is broadly published with over 700 citations in the National Library of Medicine. He has testified multiple times in the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, European Parliament, and many state capitals concerning public health policy. Dr. McCulloch.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, subcommittee members, it's an honor to present my insights, my analysis, my clinical experience on this very important topic. The first time I testified at Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, before a word came out of my mouth, Minority Senator Gary Peters said, what America was about to hear was misinformation. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I had never heard that term before in academic medicine or in important deliberations. That's November 19th, 2020. What was he doing? He was using an old communist propaganda technique. He was attempting to gain leverage over me before a word ever came out of my mouth. We should never have our public servants ever try to gain leverage over anyone who is coming to Washington to help the nation on an important issue. As introduced, I'm an internist, I'm a cardiologist. I believe I'm the most published individual who's ever testified on matters related to COVID-19 in any of these hearings. I've seen and examined more patients. I've examined more data, and I'm one of the most published people on the topic in the world. And as a cardiologist, I can tell you, my role in this was to fight disease, preserve life, and above all, do no harm. Do no harm.
I get the feeling that this is like the last time he's going to do this, that he's done. And it's amazing how he's insisting that you have to believe him. It's a lot like trying to, how they set you up with, I'm not going to say that, it's too dark. But I think they play this card a lot in a lot of different ways. They can do it with race and with racism because you don't understand because you're white. But they can do it with a lot of other things too, like because you don't have a disease or you don't have a situation, then you don't get it. And they do it with expertise, they do it with empathy, and we have to reject this kind of reasoning wholeheartedly as independent thinking adults.
Now, the topic today is myocarditis or heart damage from the COVID-19 vaccines. I'm a cardiologist. I know the topic well. I've examined thousands of patients with this problem. Thousands. Before the pandemic, I had 2 patients ever with this problem. There's 1,065 papers in the peer-reviewed literature on COVID vaccine myocarditis. So let me summarize them for you. The first one that came on my radar screen that was alarming came from Washington University in St. Louis, August 18th of 2021. The first author is Verma and colleagues, New England Journal of Medicine. 42-year-old man comes into Washington University Hospital with vaccine myocarditis. The infection's ruled out.
Why would we be at Washington? Yeah, right? I mean, this is, I think there's...
This is the vaccine. He's in the hospital. This is one of our best hospitals in the United States. He dies 3 days after taking Moderna. They can't save him in the hospital.
Say, Dr. McCullough, move the microphone just a little bit away from you.
Then one was reported.
We're getting
from
too many
Korea by
plosives.
Troy and colleagues.
We're getting too many plosives.
This is now a younger man. Just a few days after Pfizer. He comes in the hospital. He dies within 8 hours of being in the hospital. I can tell you, I'm a cardiologist. That doesn't even happen with heart attacks. He dies within 8 hours. I examined all of the slides and the images that the Koreans had showed us. It looked like somebody took a blowtorch to that heart. It was so completely fried with inflammation. His heart was destroyed. These cases, which were widely known at the time, should have gotten everyone's attention. Everyone should have been laser focused on this. We should never have someone die after taking a vaccine that's directly caused to the vaccine. Then Gill and colleagues, Connecticut, published in Archives of Pathology, 2 boys, aged 16 and 17, who die a few days after taking Pfizer. These are teenagers. They're found dead at home by their parents. They're absolutely horrified. They requested.
So COVID shots are bad. Don't talk about 2020, right? I'm being clear about what's happening here.
An autopsy. They call in University of Michigan and University of Minnesota to look over what are they finding at autopsy.
I've been saying that, I think, since 2023, that they're doing something weird because they're only talking about the COVID shots and they don't want to talk about 2020 anymore. They don't want to talk about 2021 anymore. And they are doing it still. It is remarkable.
Autopsy. Conclusion, it's Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis, unequivocal. These are autopsy-confirmed cases. So for all the mothers in the room, how would they feel if they found their children dead after taking a COVID-19 vaccine? This is in the peer-reviewed literature. This is not misinformation.
Now, shouldn't this make all of the moms that have lost a kid to SIDS angry, and all those moms should already be in the tent of CHD because CHD would have been telling them a long time ago that SIDS is probably just vaccines and you should speak out or we should look into it. But they never did. They don't until very, very recently. And then they're still doing it in such a ham-fisted, half-assed way that no progress is made. And so this guy is going to make you believe that it's the spike protein, that the transfection worked really well, but they chose this absolutely toxic spike protein that has a extremely toxic S1 subunit. I shit you not.
Everyone should be paying attention to this. This is not conjecture. This is in the peer-reviewed literature. So we started to ask ourselves, what is going on? Turns out that Pfizer and Moderna and Janssen are the genetic code for the spike protein. The spike protein is the damaging part of the virus. The spike protein is loaded into the body and it causes tremendous damage in some. Acute myocarditis appears to have some genetic predilection and all of the
genetic predilection. Holy.
Stop lying.
Wow.
Stop lying.
Maybe it's racial.
Vials of the vaccine are not the same. But I can tell you, I'm concerned that until the vaccines are stopped, there will be cases of acute myocarditis. And to finish, we've had 216 vaccine deaths this year alone. So if the vaccine campaign continues, we have to look at what are we getting out of it now, 4.5 years of the campaign, and how many more people will die. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Our next witness is Dr. Jordan Vaughn. Dr. Vaughn is a physician and clinical researcher in Birmingham, Alabama. As owner and CEO of MedHelp Clinics, Dr. Vaughn has directed his organization to the leading edge of early outpatient treatment of COVID-19 for his patients and greater Birmingham community. Dr. Vaughn has treated over 4,000 long COVID and COVID vaccine injured patients. Dr. Vaughn.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Blumenthal, thank you for having me. I'm going to dovetail a little bit off what Dr. McCullough said. And one of the things
wait. Is this the guy that was on that? Oh my gosh.
People working for him.
Wait, let's see where we are.
170,000 patients a year. When COVID came along, I had to really.
We're at 8 minutes and 15 seconds. I got to go back. Holy shit. I didn't even realize that was happening right now, but it is, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Look at this. Look at this. Okay? When this slide advances, I'm going to just advance it without the transition. You will see up here that the second VRSF live on spike-induced brain injury was Kevin McCairn and this Jordan Vaughn guy. Holy shit. Can you see the admission? Can you see how easy it is to see? Are you from the UK? Are you from the Netherlands? Are you from France? Are you from Russia or China or Australia or New Zealand? Because it's all should be visible to you. America has been subverted by people like Steve Kirsch and Robert Malone and Meryl Nass and Mary Holland and all of these organizations. They've co-opted Brian Hooker, and Brian Hooker can't do anything about it. And all the way back here, you can see on Thursday, April 24th, they already told you they had it. They just didn't bring in Kevin McCairn because we blew him out of the water, because he legitimizes me. His track record of 5 years of coming after me, calling me names, making thumbnails about me, and then showing up here with him while this guy was on a podcast saying that Rixie's a hero. Rixie was in Japan with this guy for a year, going to swimming pools with him, living in his house. This is unbelievable that guy is in front of Congress right now after having just been on a podcast with that foreign traitor meddler. Wow. I can't believe it. I simply can't believe it. I didn't think that I was doing this. Like it just keeps happening. It's always just keeps happening. I got to go advance it, right? To 8:15.
People working for him and actually seeing about 170,000 patients a year. When COVID came along, I had to really figure out how to not only help my staff and make sure they're safe, but also help the patients that my organization was responsible for. And that really made me dive into understanding the pathology. And what I came away with was understanding that the spike protein, the S1 subunit specifically, is not a benign protein. It triggers inflammation, it disrupts endothelial barriers, it induces fibrin resistant to breakdown, and it promotes a lot of amyloid aggregates, which is what I research. These effects impair oxygen delivery, damage blood vessels, contribute to clotting pathologies that manifest with a lot of the symptoms that we're seeing in the long COVID and vaccine injured, which to this day is a huge...
He's a lot better than McCairn, that's for sure. If they had McCairn sitting here right now, it would all be over already. I mean, that's impressive.
Amount of people. We're talking upwards of 10 to 15 million people in America that are being affected by the consequences of COVID in the long form or vaccine injury. And the typical symptoms are things like heart racing, brain fog, shortness of breath, and post-exertional malaise. In my clinic, I actually use immunofluorescent microscopy to be able to actually see what's going on in the blood and look for these amyloid aggregates. Some as young as teenagers that are unable to stand. Others are previously active adults suffering small strokes without typical identifiable causes. These are not abstract theories. They're the lived realities of my patients in Alabama and beyond. The mRNA injection, heralded as a solution, introduced a novel mechanism, lipid nanoparticles delivering modified mRNA that instructs the cells to produce a stabilized spike protein. Unlike traditional vaccines, this approach resulted in uncontrolled production of the spike protein for an unknown duration and distributes it widely across organs, including the heart, brain, and vasculature.
Now, it's funny because we were already talking about this in 2021 when a guy by the name of Byron Bridle came out to say that this is what would happen. And instead of an immediate halt of the rollout of transfection, Robert Malone went public with Steve Kirsch on the Brett Weinstein podcast and essentially took all of the attention away from this guy who was burning his career in Canada. And Canada, in fact, put him off of camera because they went very hard after his career. And only when it was time did they get Byron Bridle on a few streams with Robert Malone or a few streams with Kevin McKernan and say, yeah, you're a hero, man. But who do they have in front of us telling us now? It's not Byron Bridle, the hero. It's not even Robert Malone, the guy who stepped in front of him in June of 2021. It's this guy, amyloidosis. When the only people who were saying amyloidosis in 2020 were Kevin McCairn and Richard Fleming and a guy by the name of Walter Chestnut and Jessica Rose. I mean,
and ovaries and testes.
The script is exposed.
The actual EMA, their assessment of Comirnaty, which is Pfizer's vaccine, noted biodistribution beyond the injection site.
He didn't even say Comirnaty right. This is a joke.
Contradicting claims that the vaccine stays in the arm. And a recent groundbreaking study using single-cell precision nanocarrier identification revealed LNP accumulation in the heart tissue of mice with adverse proteomic changes in immune and vascular proteins, raising concerns about the cardiac complications that dovetail with what we were seeing when we were looking at the COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis.
Is he seriously going to just read? Just like Callie Means did? Or Casey, whatever the hell her name is? Like, this is a joke. They are so deep in their bench right now that they are reading scripts. And this guy will not do it anymore. What you saw there was Peter McCullough saying, dudes, I'm done with this shit. Now they're stepping in other people.
Myocarditis. I will tell my first encounter with a vaccine injury came in winter of 2021. 69-year-old man from Alabama presented with unexplained shortness of breath. He was a patient of mine. He really had no other reason that he had this shortness of breath. And after the second Pfizer dose, he actually had significant shortness of breath. I couldn't figure it out in a sense because it would typically be that he had a pulmonary embolism, but empirical anticoagulation and antiplatelet therapy brought rapid improvement. This case prompted deeper investigation that the spike protein's ability to induce fibrin that's resistant to breakdown, activate platelets irreversibly, and damage the inside of our vessels.
It's not the spike protein, it's transfection. You can look in the primary literature of PubMed, the website of NIH, and you can find papers where one of the early proposed uses of lipid nanoparticles was to transfect platelets because that's where they tended to go. Just like liver was also another place where they tended to go. So they thought, why not use it in Jesse Gelsinger? Even if some goes systemic, it'll come right back to the liver anyway. That's where they mostly go. So if we injected it into the liver, for sure it'll work. Ladies and gentlemen, we're standing like this far away from the brick wall. All we got to do is open our eyes and see the bricks. All we got to do is open our eyes and see that there's nobody left on the bench. The people that have been on the floor for the last 5 years are tired. And they can't do a full court press anymore, especially not with these half-asses. So we have them on the ropes. We have to keep the pressure steady. And that's what I think our job has to be now, is to keep up the steady pressure. And I think that the other guys who are doing that are Mark Kulak and Joe Marshall of the Liberty Perspective. I will confess that I don't always get to watch everything that he sends me. And when I do watch Joe, I always watch it at 2x, but I watch a lot of things at 2x. It's not an insult. That's time saving. So I think Joe does a lot of really great work, and he does a lot of work that I can't do because he's read a lot of things that I haven't read. Just like Mark Kulak finds and archives things that otherwise I would have never read. So thanks to those guys for staying in the fight. Ladies and gentlemen, realize that the way that this bamboozlement is being happened is that we inherited a bad biology from our parents and from our high school and college biology teachers. And I think that we can come up with a high school curriculum that will teach a new biology that will make this exactly as ridiculous as it is, evolution because DNA. We have to dispel that illusion. We have to dispel the illusion of endemicity and explain that that is also a mythology that upon which this pandemic myth rests. And that's also why the anti-vax movement is fake in America, because they have to sustain that myth. But we can seek the truth. You can see it because they only talk about the COVID shots being bad. They don't talk about 2020 because they want you to never realize that there was an infinitesimally, irreducibly complex background of genetic signals on the background of which any of these PCR tests could be used as a diagnostic. And the way they got away with transfection is they just put out a bunch of placebos. They've probably been doing that for years already to the very, very happy companies that can do it. You know, mostly Merck. Using their tests to find their ghost doesn't make you a ghostbuster. It doesn't make their ghosts real. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing. And if you can, thanks for supporting. If you ever supported, thank you. If you can't support anymore, thank you. And if you're thinking about supporting, thank you very much. See you guys again soon.
Concerned. But one thing I am confident of from everything I've read is that this RNA exists. You can capture it, you can sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.